All right. Well, welcome to the Far Reaching podcast. I am today's host, Sean Stone, Director of Victims of War, and we have a real special episode today. Once again, we're blessed to have our founder, Director Wes Bentley, with us and talking about a division and an aspect of our ministry that is, it's been part of who we are, but a special focus lately, a clandestine, a new division of our ministry that Wes is going to share about, and kind of the journey of how we got here and what that looks like for us as a ministry, but also with some stories that will inspire, challenge, shock you, motivate you. You will not be able to listen to this unchanged. And if you do, then there's something seriously wrong with you. So Wes, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Sean.
Well, Wes, I wanted to talk about, there's so many things that we could always jump into, but something that hit me about 2 years ago when I was on staff here. It was one particular morning that seemed to me to be maybe a turning point or a new chapter that God was writing in the story of Far Reaching and what he has us do in the world.
Right.
And it was one morning that we had a staff meeting that you called emergency. And I could tell you hadn't slept all night. And it was right after the Taliban invaded and retook all of Afghanistan. After a 20-year hard-fought war on America's part, we saw what they did. They just pulled out overnight.
Right.
And we saw the horrors, the images of people clinging for life, falling off planes, and you were up literally all night.
Right.
Bring us back to that moment for you and as a ministry. What was going through your mind and heart, and what you did as a staff, what you did to us and for us as a staff that day?
Well, we have a Dutch counterpart that we've worked with for years, and I won't share the names of the organizations right now. I feel that we need to be careful about that. But I got a call, and they informed me that 22 missionaries were in the underground with extended families, over 200 people, and they all expected to be killed. There was one missionary that had led 3 Islamic families to Christ. They went into hiding, not thinking that the other people were endangered, but the Taliban found the 3 families and executed mother, father, children, down to babies. And so I was literally getting calls all night from Afghanistan. I couldn't sleep, trying to figure out what we were going to do. And I just realized that, we needed to go in and get those people. So I went down to the staff and I told them we're going into wartime operations, and we're going to go into Afghanistan to get our people out. And that would launch the operation. And we... About a week later, 5 former Navy SEALs flew in, 3 former Marines, all special forces, 1 Army Green Beret, and 1 brother with the CIA. And we planned operations into Afghanistan. And shortly after that, I would send in 2 teams.
Yeah. I want to talk about the mission. I want to talk about, we're actually recording in the room where we had that war landing, which was one of the, for me, one of the more special moments of life, to sit in a room with true patriots, true believers who care about people. I just want to ask you your mind and your heart, because what I saw, and I've known you for years, but I saw something which it just validated what I know about you, is you cared about these people like they were your own kids.
Right.
Literally were distraught, and you felt a burden for people literally on the other side of the globe that you'd never met, but you felt a personal responsibility to do something about that. What drives you to feel that way?
Well, one, we were sponsoring them. They were missionaries with us. And they were really brought to us through our Dutch counterpart. They brought in, we supported them. But, the Word of God tells us that we are to empathize with people as though we were suffering ourselves. And I don't think most of the body really takes that to heart. But for me, having worked in the South Sudan for over almost 26 years now, I have been through villages that have been decimated by the Islamic forces. And I've walked through fields that weren't more than an acre or 2 with 200-300 bodies in them. And so I knew what was getting ready to happen. I knew that there was going to be a mass slaughter, that there'd be a lot of innocent people killed, people that we would not be able to help. And one of the first images that came out of there was of a young girl, looked like she was in her early 20s. She was dressed well. She had some bracelets and jewelry on, looked like she really took care of herself. And I could see her eyes, and they were a beautiful hazel color, but there was blood all over her body. And her crime was that she had worked in an office. And so the Taliban executed her. And so These were the first images coming into us, and they were coming in fast. And we did have assets in country. We had people that worked within the intelligence community that were feeding us information. I mean, fortunately, at Far-Reaching Ministries, we do have former FBI and former CIA working for us. And because of that, we're able to get a lot of information. But the images that came in, there were things that I can't share. I knew what was going to happen. It was going to be a slaughter. It was going to be a time of great rape. I've been to villages where armies have come in and raped all the women, and I knew it was coming.
Yeah, I remember at that same time we were getting some videos from some of those team members of
Right.
those that we support. I remember two videos that, to me, some of them were haunting things I've seen. One was a group of men rounded up by the Taliban, hands bound behind their neck on their road, and just executed. I'd never seen it. I mean, I'd seen videos, and I know this is something for you, that you've seen sadly throughout the years. And so for me, it was such a shocking thing to watch. In 1 second, a man alive, and then gone. And this a group of men really demonized. I mean, just shooting weapons indiscriminately, screaming in the air, all Akbar, everything else, and it was like just without any absolute value at all for human life.
Right.
And the second video was traumatic, and it was recorded on a cell phone. And it was of a young, maybe 12 or 13-year-old girl screaming at the top of her lungs, trying to clutch onto her dad. And her mom is like pulling her away because the Taliban was there, because they were allowed to, basically, according to their religion and faith, no, I get to marry this girl. And this girl screaming for her life at 12 or 13 years old, being forced to marry some soldier. Yeah.
Yeah, her family was held at gunpoint, and the parents were crying and screaming. But, this is a very helpless thing when you know that they're just going to shoot you. You don't have the control. At this point, all a parent can do is hope that somehow their daughter survives, somehow they get her back someday. But that young girl, I think she was probably between 11 and 12 years old, and she was to be married to a 65-year-old Taliban man that night. And he was there. He was watching it. And, here he's seeing this child scream, but what's going through in his mind is that he's going to be on top of her in a very short time. And the perversion of that just makes me sick,
A lot of our ministry, we were down in Latin America a couple weeks ago, and we'll stay on topic of Afghanistan, but we sat in a room, with the children that we've been blessed to rescue, and the emotions we're having.
Right.
Many of us had tears, sadness for these kids, anger. You just wanted to rip these guys about, and yet also hope, because we were seeing the good and things that God was right midst of it all. And I don't think I've ever seen you cry. I'm sure it's happened once or twice in your life, but I also realize you may not shed a tear, but you feel very deeply, and you don't just feel, you do stuff about it.
I think for me, one of the heavy effects for me when we're down in Central America, and for the viewers who are not aware, children are being sold at very young ages to men for sex, as early as 6 years of age. And we have an orphanage down there with a 9-year-old that told us that her father, when she was about 6, started bringing in 5, 6 men a night to sleep with her, and they would watch her shower, and then they would sodomize her, and she would pass out from the pain. And then you think that these filthy human beings would say, "What am I doing?" But what do? They splash her with water and wake her up and do it again. And she's 9 now. She's HIV positive. She needs reconstructive surgery on both the front and the back. And I do believe in capital punishment. I believe that men like this should absolutely be executed. And so, but I met with a little girl. She came up and hugged me. And one of the things when you're at the place that we have the children, you can see the girls that have an aversion to men. They're scared of them, and they don't know if they can trust them. Some of the girls have adopted real well. They've been able just to put it away, maybe because they're so young, but others, they're children, but there's something in the eyes they've seen things and done things they shouldn't do. And I think about what it must be like for a young girl when she's been used that much. She must feel very little value to her life and think that I'm worthless, and which nothing could be further from the truth. She's a child of God, and she's a beautiful young girl, and she was abused by wicked people. And, we intend to deal with these people.
Sometimes I say this, I don't know, we've got good guys sometimes doing bad things with
Well,
And it kind of brings me to some of the team members for Afghanistan. And these guys they're highly trained and yet taking those skills.
well, a friend of mine, he was formerly with the SEAL teams, and he has his own private contracting company. Once we were doing a rescue operation in another country to get people out, and he was telling me about his guys, and he was saying these are really bad guys that can do really good things. And basically, he was saying, in a situation where you need someone to go through there and be ruthless for the sake of protecting others, they will do it. And unfortunately, we're living in that day and age where we need to find people who are willing to do what it takes to save children. If this wasn't happening, we wouldn't have to be responding to it. But it's happening on a large-scale basis. And not only is it happening, children are being murdered. While recently in Central America, we have an on video, one of the traffickers talking about taking the children to a place where they could be raped, where the screams wouldn't be heard, and then afterwards drowning them and feeding them to the crocodile so the evidence would be removed. Well, in situations like that, when people say, well, as a Christian organization, you can't get involved, maybe you can't, but I can.
I have no problem. I sit real well, man. Let's just touch on that for a moment, because I know obviously throughout the years there's been those who, so many people support, but every once in a while you got your naysayers being moved for, various reasons, either because I think most of them, they don't even understand. They just what we're doing and they don't even know. They just see an image and they come to conclusions. But just that idea of soldiers, of rescue, and some get this idea of pacifism. As Christians, we're not supposed to do this. What's your answer to that? I know you've got a good one.
Well, it's interesting for me because I've known this for years, but something happened a few months ago. I was in New York, and I was at a Calvary Chapel, and the pastor was telling me he was talking to a pastor of one of the largest churches in America about me, and I just said to him, I said, I'm surprised they even know who we are. And it was the way he said, he goes, oh, Wes, he goes, everybody has an opinion about you. And what we realized is that a lot of people think we embellish. They think we're not telling the truth. Yet we probably had 200 pastors come overseas, and every one of them will say FRM has understated everything. It's much smaller than it is. But there is that problem because I know there's a group of them out there that get together and they badmouth the ministry, and it affects our ability to do work with other churches, And if you're one of those people that you don't want to be a part of this, at the very least, you should keep your mouth shut, because you're hindering the work of God. And so I think there's also a little bit of jealousy, Sean. I think there are men out there that they're not soldiers. They wouldn't do this. And the fact that we do it somehow makes them feel less, and that shouldn't be that way. I actually recently had a conversation with Pastor Don McClure, and Don's a dear friend of Vicky, and
You were one of those guys that came to Nimbley and saw our chaplain base and had never seen anything like this. I didn't believe the stories. I remember him saying that.
Yeah, well, he told me, he said, Wes, he goes, for the first 2 years that I heard about you, I didn't like it. I didn't.
There was a mercenary
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah, he goes. I didn't believe it. He said, he said, it's so hard to believe that someone could actually do these things. But again, for me, Sean, I don't have any desire for personal glory, and I think the fact that we've never written a book, and I've literally had pastors say, if you wrote a mission book, it would be the best mission book ever written because nobody has your stories. And if the Lord tells me to do that, I'm fine with it. But I don't have a desire to do it. Why? Because I'm not doing it for glory. I'm doing it for Christ.
So, yeah, amen to that. I served with a pastor one time who jokingly said, this is all of my stories are true, and some of them actually happened. It's kind of a funny way of saying, I take my stories and embellish them.
Right.
The stories at FRM all of them are true, and they actually did happen.
Yes.
When they do get understated, you're right. With that, I just want to drill down a little bit further on that. Just that idea, of pacifism versus action. And this has been an age-long debate. Right. Augustine wrote a long treatise on justification for Christians at war. Give me your 1 minute answer to that.
People have a real misunderstanding of the scripture. They think that turn the other cheek means to allow to do nothing. I heard a pastor get up and he said, if a man breaks into your house and decides to rape your woman, you're going to have to think about what you want to do. Well, that's absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, yeah. Well, how well can she feel protected? Turn the other cheek means take an offense for the gospel. It never meant to let men rape women or children or to torture them and kill them, to burn them alive. And, we've seen it all. We've seen the harvest of children's organs. And so people need to really wake up. And again, turn the other cheek means take an offense. It does not mean to allow people to murder. I don't think anybody thinks King David would sit around and let the Philistines come in and just do what they want to do.
Coming back to Afghanistan, because I kind of want to keep chasing this thread of kind of the clandestine, is a word that you've chosen carefully to describe a division and some of what we're doing at Far Reaching. We were in this room right after that staff meeting. How do we rescue 22 workers? But it wasn't just them, it was their families. It's about 250. And we'll get to the almost couple thousand that we've been personally responsible to rescue.
Right.
So very quickly, within a matter of a couple of days, how in the world did you get Navy SEALs and CIA agents here? I mean,
well, I think the Lord had this all planned out. I actually had several SEALs contact me. I didn't know them. They'd heard about our ministry, and they flew out and saw the work. And they were Christian brothers, strong men. And what they said to me afterwards is, Wes, we didn't believe this when we first heard about it, but you're the real deal. So became good friends with some of them, really good friends. And I think the one thing that I appreciate about these guys, guys from SEAL teams, they have a respect for people who get things done. Well, we've been able to get things done because God is behind it. And so, I contacted a good friend. He was a lead sniper for one of the SEAL teams, and I asked him to put together an operation. And this is where the Lord really stepped in, because the figure he gave me for the operation was about $400,000. I think it was $379,000 for the operation, first operation in. And I was in Kampala, Uganda, praying one night, and I was up because I was getting calls every 15 minutes, and I was praying and trying to figure out what to do. And the Lord spoke to my heart, and he said, I'm going to give you one piece of the puzzle at a time. And literally the next day, a gentleman called me and told me that the Lord had spoken to him, and he was supposed to send us $400,000, which covered the first operation. And I said to him, I said, brother, I can't promise you that I can get anybody out. I want to be very upfront about that. I said, now I'll do my best, but I can't make those kind of promises. If you ask me how to fight a war in Sudan, I can tell you, but I've never been to Afghanistan. All my guys have, but I haven't. Yeah. And he said, Wes, I'm not asking for anything. Well, because of that first seed and God doing that, I think I actually talked to one of our head guys yesterday, and I think there were 1,890 people out right now.
Yeah. I remember that. You're like, we're going to do this. We don't have the budget. One of the things that we do is go out and speak to our churches. And you've said this before, this ministry floats on $50 a month, $25 a month sponsorships. And we raise sponsors for chaplains, for widows, for orphans, for our kids. And we're really good at, as far as trusting the Lord in faith, but being fiscally responsible for that. But there's things like this, and, this big operation that's not in the budget. You can't forecast, Taliban's going to take over, and now we're going to have a couple $1 million rescue operation. You don't raise funds for that. But you just stated the Lord provided, and he's been provided miraculously.
Yeah,
finances and the people to do these things.
I don't want to give this as exact number, but I think this is the number right now. I think that we have brought in about $4.5 million, which have been rescued, these people, over 2 years now. In saying that, by the time we are done, I think that we will literally have spent every penny. I don't think there's going to be anything left in, which was always our goal. Was we never wanted to use a crisis in the world to get money for our ministry. I don't think it's right. One of the things with us is we float on an ocean of small sponsor donations. But what happens is about half of the money that comes in from donations for projects, which that's where it goes to. But then people donate when they get the newsletter for other things, and that's how we support the ministry. And so it's about equal, about 50% donations, about 50% sponsorships. And we're able to tell people that we're not using your sponsorship for a child or for a widow to do our work. We're using it for those people.
Yeah, it's great. Just this last Sunday, I was sharing at church, and it was great to be able to tell people, I'm like, well, how much does this go? And I said, well, if you sponsor that child, your dollars go in there. Well, how are you able to do that? Well, we've got some great donors that understand it's hard to raise money to keep the lights on, but there's some Christian businessmen who understand it's a hard thing to raise money for, and so they donate to that so that we can go out and do those things.
Right.
And I had one family just so moved. It was amazing. One family gave $1,000 a month, and they didn't have the money, but God had blessed, and
God bless them.
God bless them, exactly. And they sponsored a few of our children, but then they also just understood. We also want you to have the freedom. When I told the stories of Afghanistan and Ukraine and some of these things, and how do you do that? They're like, well, we have our most needed fund, and that gives us a discretion at those times. So we're able to have the flexibility because we know, hey, you give that, we have to have integrity. It goes there.
Right.
This is how we do that.
And Charles, it's just something people need to understand, because I had a lady call in and she was asking about the numbers changing in our newsletters. Well, one of the things is we're painting a broad picture. We don't know what things are going to cost. And one of the things that one of the donors asked me, they go, where did you get the figures for this newsletter? And I said, well, first of all, we were talking to people within the CIA, the DIA, which is the Defense Intelligence Agency, from the State Department, from Blackwater, many other people like that. And in the beginning, it was costing that amount of money. Mm-hmm. But in the end, we found ways to get people out for almost nothing. We really brought the cost down. But, people have to have the grace to realize that we're so busy just trying to rescue lives. I don't have time to sit down and be an accountant and give you to the penny what we're doing.
Sometimes the plane's being assembled as it's going out on the runway.
It's exactly it. Yeah.
Well, I think with that, let me ask you a question. That in the narrative of what happened in Afghanistan kind of helps answer two questions. One, it lets us know that operation. Two, it kind of explains some of it.
Right.
Because when I was here, we had topographical maps of Afghanistan.
Right.
There was a quick phased 1A and 1B that took two teams into a neighboring country. I don't know much detail what you want to share. So I'll give you the discretion on some of that. But the operation began with you guys dropping in a couple of team members to different areas trying to get into Afghanistan.
Right.
But the mission of the last 2 years has taken on a lot of different facets. It's evolved. It went in one way thinking, okay, we're just going to do something. And that step of faith led to a lot of different things.
Right.
And so the initial cost was great because you're saying things, and then it adapted and changed.
Right.
And so a lot more people were able to get out.
Well, unfortunately, we can't tell people how we did things because what's happening with our nation is going to happen again. So we have to keep all of our information secret to them. But the first group was we sent two teammates in. I sent them in, I guess. And the first one flew in a chopper and landed at 12,000 feet, deployed Marines and SEALs. I was with the second team, and we had Marines and SEALs, and we actually went in three directions. And, we ended up having to climb to 11,500 feet to get to our location. And then we launched our drones. Well, there's times I thought I'd had a greater chance of dying on the mountain than dying by the Taliban. And but we got it to 11,500, and we launched our drones. And what we're looking for is a rat line, which is an escape route. Now, we were 20 miles apart by land. If you were to drive from one location to next by car, it'd take you 20 hours to get there. But it was the same country, and then, of course, bordering Afghanistan, going into the Afghan mountains. And again, we've established many, many ways to get people out. And it's a very long and tedious process, but we have a good group of people who are on it.
Yeah. Maybe if you can talk a little bit about, there was that process. You guys went in twice to those neighboring countries. I want to come back to one particular family that you met, but I'll come back to that. That moved all of our hearts. A couple little girls and their mom, and he was down brutally murdered. But so you guys go in, you take a step of faith, you have a plan, but the plan is going to have to evolve and change.
Right.
And over the last 2 years, to get almost 1,900 people out, they didn't all come to the U.S. Very few did. In fact, a lot of different countries, different places.
Right.
I know our mission from the very beginning was, if we're going to rescue these people, we're going to rescue them into a better situation.
Right.
We're rescuing them out of.
Right.
Because there's a lot of other people on the initial energy, excitement, well, just got people out, and then we've abandoned them there, and it's been tragic to see them deported back to the waiting arms of the Taliban. Now, we ended up using some different types of folks. You want to speak into that, and kind of very unique.
We had people in the intelligence world that we worked with in intelligence from different countries and communities. And what we were able to do is get the proper documentation. And again, I can't tell you how we got it. It was legitimate documentation. Yeah, and Taliban did well. They knew what was going on, and we had to have redundant operations. And what that means is one gets burned, another one is still operating. And during the process, 2 of them were burned. But through getting these people the proper documentation, we moved them. Now, for example, if they were Islamic or Muslim, we moved them into countries like Pakistan, Iran.
Yeah, right. We felt to call these are humans that we obviously preach to,
right,
or to respond to. There's different criteria that we marked Muslims as well.
Yeah, so Muslims into other Muslim countries that were safer, and then Christians into places like Brazil. A lot of what we were trying to do is give them money because, working in Africa, people sell every morning on the streets. They call it a chapati or a Rolex. So basically, a Rolex is like a flour tortilla that's very thick that has egg in it, and they roll it up. Yeah. Well, and but you give people money, and they can go into a country, and they have some small business where they can make a street food, and they're not going to get rich. They're not going to buy a car, but they can feed their family. Now, guys, we wish we had the ability to give them all a new life. For some of them, they're doing very well. They've gone to Brazil and gotten jobs and doing great, but other countries it's more difficult. But at least they can live, and our purpose is to save their lives.
Yeah. So we worked with a lot of believers, and also some contractors,
right?
And then different. What's another? They don't like to be called mercenaries, but contractors. And we had to stay in houses. We had to move people from safe house to safe house. We had to get food. We had to get passports. And people go, "How did it cost you $4 million?" Well, that's not cheap.
Yeah.
And you don't put a dollar on a person's life, but those are some of the things that we had to do. And that wasn't something that we had really done a lot before. But we were learning as we were.
Learned as we went. We had this one mother with, I believe, 3 daughters, and she had gotten beat up at the airport. When they're trying to get out by the airplane, and we kept telling her follow our instructions. Well, she wouldn't do it, and she got herself across the border. But the problem was she didn't have a passport, and this was very hard for us because for me to get those people passports after she had left the country was $20,000 American dollars. Whereas if she'd done it in country and waited till I got them, it would have been a whole lot cheaper. And I had to make the decision, were those 4 girls' lives worth $5,000 each, or were they not? And of course, we determined that a life is worth any amount of money. And so we got her the passports. But, we've had situations like that. And, to answer the question you were talking about before, we had a family that got out of Afghanistan. We didn't actually get them out. Youth with a Mission introduced them to them, and we went to meet them at lunch at an Afghan restaurant in the bordering country. And
oh yeah, that's what I was asking.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And when we got there, the children, there was a little boy. He was fine. The 2 daughters, I bought dolls for them.
Yeah,
not a smile. They sit down to this beautiful meal, and they look like they haven't changed their clothes in 6 weeks. Look like they haven't eaten a good meal in a long time. Yeah. And they're eating because they're hungry, but there's no joy in the face. And what we found out was the mother and her mother, both her husbands had been killed by the Taliban. But the younger mother, the guy who killed her husband was his own brother. Very high-ranking Taliban officer, very wicked man. And after he killed his own brother, and I've seen a lot of dead bodies. I saw the pictures of what happened to this man, and I'd never seen anybody so abused in my entire life.
When we all saw that picture, I remember we thought and assumed he had been burned.
Yeah.
Because the body was so...
It was black.
Yeah. And then we realized, oh no, it was just beaten to death.
Yeah.
They just didn't like them out.
Yeah. The whole body was black and purple and red. And after he did that, he raped his brother's wife, and he raped his brother's 4-year-old daughter. And so when we were at the meal, the mother's telling us that he's communicating through other family members and saying, if you don't come back, I'll kill all 14, 15 members of your family. And when she said that, the daughter that wasn't raped just began to weep uncontrollably because she was terrified that her mom was going to go back. And, and I explained to her that she couldn't put the safety of her adult family above that of these children. And then went on to say that Jesus says, come to me, all you burdened and heavy laden. And I said, now that being said, we will send an operational team to get your family out. And we did. We got them out. But the child was extremely traumatized. And, when I'm going back to that area to see the family, the young girl tells everybody, my grandfather's coming, my grandfather's coming. And I see hope in her eyes. She's happy. She's not afraid. And fear is a terrible thing for anyone, but as a child, it's especially bad.
Yeah, and a child should have to experience that.
Right.
That. One of the things that struck me when we were down in, Central America was when the director's wife said, we are sowing big hope in little hearts.
Right.
And that's why we do what we do, is you serve the God of hope.
Right.
And hope is this belief. It's not wishful thinking like the world. Hope is this deep conviction, faith, hope, and love. Hope is good will come. We don't know how or when, but God is good and he's going to work something out for good. And
right.
We deal with evil all the time and it angers us, but we also see hope. We see God showing up most unexpected times, unexpected places, and bringing redemption and healing.
You see lives transformed, and there's always good stories. There's always bad stories. There's always, one of the great things that God did with FRM, because we prayed and we trusted him, we did not lose a single person that was entrusted to us in our safe houses. Now, there were other people that we were asked to rescue, but they weren't in our safe houses, and they were caught and they were killed. I think the last count was probably around, I'd heard 25, is probably 50 by now.
Yeah.
But the ones that we had in our, and again, we had a situation where the Taliban rolled up in a neighborhood. There was about 18 members of a family, and the 5-year-old ran outside because he's a kid. He wants to see what's going on. And so I got a call, and they said there's a chance that they got burned and the Taliban's going to come back, because this kid ran out and he was giving away information, and the Taliban was asking him questions. And I was talking to a man who was actually in American intelligence, and he goes, Wes, I think it's safe. We don't have to just leave him. And I said, I disagree. And again, guys, I'm going by praying and listening to the Holy Spirit speak to my heart. I said, we're going to send an operational team. And we did. We got an operational team. We went in there. We moved them. It was quite expensive. I don't remember what it was, like $40,000 to move them. And we had to move them that night. We moved them that night. The next day, Taliban raided the house.
So that story.
Yeah.
And there was countless stories like that. Right. He was a little YWAM directors. He was a CrossFit instructor. I was his cover and got him out, and several stories. I think
right.
You mentioned that mom with the widows. We think, there was in the midst of it all, and that's what people ask, how do you do what you do? Because in the midst of it all, we see the Lord. There's miraculous stories that you can't explain, and it's God's validating. I'm with you. I'm going to bless. I'm going to protect it. Not always easy.
Right.
There's a lot of heartache and pain, and yet God's there, God's here, God's there. And those are stories we get to share, and why we keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah, we had a lot of special forces that we used, guys that had great skills. But, guys, there were a lot of people over there that had former special forces. Yeah. They did not have the success we did. And I really believe that's attributed to prayer and asking God for wisdom. Every day you're woken up and you've got to get 5 or 6 people out of a country, and you have 10 bad ways to get them out, not one good one. And you pray and say, Lord, which is the safer route today? And somehow God gives you that one and you get them out. And that's why I want to attribute all glory to the Lord Jesus Christ, because I don't have that wisdom, but God sure did.
Well, this went by much quicker than I thought. I wanted to talk a little bit about dreadnought, so maybe we can get our next podcast and talk about this. It's kind of leading into something I know that's been on your mind and heart. You're sharing some newsletters, and so maybe in the next episode we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Real quick, people are listening to this podcast, and they're stirred, they're inspired. What would you tell them to do if they want to contribute and give? Where would you tell them to go?
Well, guys, I think there's a lot of ways you can give. You could actually call our office and say, choose to sponsor a child or a pastor. What we're talking about is the clandestine, and we have over 400 people in the underground in none of the 10 most dangerous Islamic countries in the world. Well, you could be a sponsor of one of those pastors for $75 a month. Now, guys, one of the things, a lot of organizations aren't really honest about sponsorship. There was 20 years ago, they'd say you could sponsor someone for $35. Nobody can sponsor a missionary for $35. $35 buys a sack of groceries. That's it. But we do it by country. For example, if you're in Pakistan or Afghanistan, $300 is a good salary, and you can do mission work there. There's a lot of countries like that. In the South Sudan, the chaplains, between their equipment and what we give them, it probably comes to around $300 a month, and that supports them to be out there, and they're really doing a lot of ministry. Other countries like Russia, and there's a lot of Russian believers that love the Lord. They're not for what's going on, but we have them, and there are some people that are doing tremendous work, but it takes about $1,500 so we do it country by country. And what you can do is call and say, I'd like to be a sponsor with Ghost Operations, and what they'll do is they'll give you a pastor. Now, unfortunately, we can't tell you any information other than what's on the card, because if they are found out, they will be killed.
Yeah, so the card, for those who don't know, is that we have our dossiers, and that's where we go out and speak. We change the names, blur out their faces, but we do tell the story of who they are,
right?
Testimony, and what they're doing for the Lord. Because we need to protect their identities, because if not, their life's at risk. So
extreme risk, yeah.
Yeah, so you can call 951-677-4474 and ask for anybody, and we can give you more information. You can certainly go to our website, www.frmusa.org.
Right.
And we have a lot of the different divisions: Ghost Operations, our frontline children, chaplains, and many other things that you can get involved with and learn more information and sponsor as well.
And Sean, it's just storing treasures in heaven. Me and my wife, we're missionaries, but we support many missionaries around the world. Why? We want to store our treasures.
Amen. Yeah, it's funny you say that, and funny in a good way. I've been sharing the last several weeks, and you give the people an opportunity, and I don't feel like we have to be salesmen at all and try to manipulate. We're evangelists. Like, listen, this is what God's doing, and you have the opportunity to part.
Right.
And we're called to invest our money. I've got 401k. I know you've got retirement. Not that we're going to stop serving the Lord, but we want to be wise and have the freedom to go and do what God wants us to do when He wants us to do it.
Right.
But how do you invest? How do you lay up for yourselves treasures in heavens? I'm convinced it's when we sponsor, when we send our money for evangelism, for discipleship. And I get the vision, I'm going to be in heaven 1 billion years from now. And I'm going to see some of these kids down in Central America. I'm going to see some of these underground pastors, some of whom I've met, some of whom I've never met, but I financially give. And I can't wait for that embrace. They're going to be like, I am here because of you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be able to do that to other people. And in the body of Christ, we don't think that way. We think too carnally, too worldly, and too limited. Let's have a bigger vision. And that's the treasure that 1 billion trillion years from now, tears and thankfulness. I could care less what car I drove or house or this or that 1 trillion years from now, but I can think this person's in heaven, this person's in heaven.
Right.
I think I showed the story of the Good Samaritan. I'll wrap this up. I know we're going long, but and the Good Samaritan saves that Jewish man beaten on the side of the road. I don't know if they ever met again. He leaves money at the hotel. Or who knows if they met, but I can't help but think in heaven they met, and he must have said, why did you do what you did?
Yeah.
You risked your life. You gave money. You left the money even. It's like, well, because I love God. And I think that's the opportunity we have.
Sean, there are many people that are wealthy, and God allows that, and you're allowed to enjoy your wealth.
Yeah.
But one of the things I think that we need to really take stock of is you can have a collection of cars, you can have a collection of homes, but what about a collection of souls that were won for the gospel? I'll tell a short story about my wife, Vicki. I kept looking at her paycheck stub because it was automatically deposited in our bank, and I kept thinking, what is going? There's no money here. I mean, literally 80% of her check is missing, and I'm thinking, and I thought maybe there was some accounts receivable, but after several months, I went to my office manager and I said, Sherry, what is going on here? I mean, I'm looking at Vicky's check. There's no money in it. Well, then she pulled it out and showed me all the missionaries she was supporting, and I'm like, how can I get mad? I mean, what am I going to do?
I don't like, just charging up in North.
Yeah, no. It was going to the kingdom, and she has that kingdom mind. She comes from a affluent family, and someday she'll inherit quite a bit of money. And she's asked me, "Can I give it all to the kingdom?" And of course, I'll allow her to do that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Wes, for joining us. Look forward to getting into our next podcast on Dreadnought and a few other things.
Yeah.
And if you like today's podcast, we'd ask you to like, subscribe, share. Again, go to our website, frmusa.org. And until next time, God bless.